Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the North Carolina Department of Information Technology's Division of Broadband and Digital Equity webinar on BEAD and digital equity. So we will be providing an update today. Several of my colleagues are here to answer your questions and provide information. We will be recording this webinar, so if you would like to see it later, we will have it available along with the slides on our website. Today, if you could please go ahead and use the chat feature. We will do the digital equity update first, so we will be taking questions related to that first before we move on to the BEAD update. And without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Maggie Woods, Deputy Director of the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy.
Thanks so much, Crystal. Good afternoon, everyone. Always great to see familiar names and new names in the chat. So welcome, welcome. If you want, you can start by introducing yourself and saying where you're joining in from, just like Rebecca Jeanette did from Bertie County. But if we move to the next slide, I'm going to provide some brief updates on what's happening in the Office of Digital Equity and Literacy. And then I'll be able to take some quick questions as well. And Crystal, I'm not seeing the next slide on my end. Wonderful. So the big exciting news, and you can see from my tone that I am so excited about this, is that we have announced our Digital Champion grantees. So as you remember, this was a program where we were looking to fund digital inclusion programs around the state. You could be a local government, a nonprofit, a higher education institution, a regional entity, and we received tremendous response, right? Over 230 applications totaling $150 million of funding. We were able to fund 63 organizations, totaling $30 million of funding. And we're really, really proud of the folks that we were able to fund. And so you can find a link on our website that shows all of the grantees. We're just getting them through the contracting process as we speak, and then we'll be continuing to update so that you know what amazing work that they're doing. But just huge round of applause. I know many folks on this call were applicants and have been awarded funds, so congrats to all of you. And just as a reminder, this comes from our office's State American Rescue Plan Act funds, so our ARPA funds. So our office has $50 million of funds, and so far we've awarded about $44 million of those dollars to fund digital equity and inclusion programs around the state. So this is really major for North Carolina. So moving to the next slide. Just a reminder, I know we celebrated this in our last quarterly meeting, but our digital equity plan was approved. It was approved last March. So many of you are a part of that process. So if you missed the announcement, it was officially approved. It's on our website. And it's a really beautiful version. If you see the next slide, you can kind of see what the format looks like. I know many of you who provided public comment saw kind of the draft version of it, but please go and check it out. And you can see really the culmination of a year's worth of work, and 10,000 North Carolinians weighed in and provided feedback or filled out surveys or participated in focus groups and listening sessions to build this plan together. And we're really proud of it and really excited for what's next. And that brings us to the next slide. And there are a number of things that are next. So the first one is that the same week that our digital equity plan was officially approved by the federal government, the National Telecommunications and Information Administration released a notice of funding opportunity for states to implement their digital equity plan. So this is called the Digital Equity Capacity Grant Program, and we were the only eligible entity to apply. So this was not open to others. This funding is being released in 3 separate tranches, so 3 separate notice of funding opportunities. The first tranche was for just over $22 million, and we expect that to be the largest tranche of funds. So we did apply. The deadline for that was May. We've been going through kind of the feedback process with the federal government. And the expected award date is fall 2024. So possibly this month, likely next month in October. And that's really, as soon as we're awarded, that's when implementation can begin. But please understand, we're also putting a lot in place so that we can kind of get started on implementation, even as we wait for the federal government to approve that funding. Just noting, because if you have read the Digital Equity Plan or you've attended these webinars, you know that this funding was supposed to last through 2029. Well, because there's now three separate tranches of funds, three separate notice of funding opportunities, and each opportunity is for 5 years, that actually extends the life cycle of this plan to 2031 or even beyond. So in many ways, that's really good news. It means that we are moving forward kind of beyond that 5 year cycle, so 7 to 8 years. So we're excited about that. The second kind of big next thing is that the National Telecommunications and Information Administration released another notice of funding opportunity. This is for everyone else on this call, or most others on this call. It's called the Digital Equity Competitive Grant Program. And I'm going to walk through some of the specifics of this in just a moment. But this is really important. The due date is coming up. I know many of you have been working hard on your applications. As a state, we're really committed to making sure that we are supporting those of you who are planning to apply for this. So more on that in a moment. And then a teaser, and I'll show you a slide on this in a moment as well. But through the digital equity planning process, we developed a pretty robust, what we called an asset inventory, but kind of a list of all of the resources, programs, and projects in the state that are focused on digital inclusion. So these are public computer labs, they're programs that provide free or low cost devices, they're programs that offer, basic digital literacy training all the way up through, advanced digital literacy, digital skills. And we've compiled it all into a pretty user-friendly interactive database that we're in kind of a demo mode right now. And we expect to release this in October. So really excited for that to come. So wanted to tease that as well. So let's move to the next slide. And I want to just talk a little bit more about this NTIA Digital Equity Competitive Grant Notice of Funding opportunity. So this is a $750 million competitive national opportunity that's being funded through the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. And this is to fund not us, but other entities to advance digital equity. And so eligible applicants include local governments, native entities, nonprofits, community anchor institutions, local education agencies, workforce development programs, et cetera. We highly recommend that if this is an opportunity that you're interested in, that you read the NOFO and see NOFO's Notice of Funding Opportunity and see if you are an eligible entity. These are supposed to be large scale programs. So individual awards will likely be awarded between 5 to 12 million. And it does require at least a 10% match, which could be cash or in kind. NTIA does not expect to fund a lot of these, about 150 to 200 awards total. So they are highly, highly encouraging partnerships. So if you're an eligible applicant and you're going to work on this, identifying partners is going to be really key. In North Carolina, this means that, we're expecting somewhere between hopefully 3 to 5 entities to be funded through this grant opportunity. We have an amazing digital equity community ecosystem. All of you have been working in this field for so long. And so we're really intent on trying to encourage as many strong applications as possible. As noted, the deadline is September 23rd. This is going to be a very competitive grant. A lot of people are going to wait till the end to submit it. We highly recommend that you submit earlier than September 23rd, just in case there's a crash or technical issues. Yes, Samantha, thank you. 23 days to go. It's coming up really, really rapidly. NTIA will be awarding on kind of a rolling basis beginning winter. I think winter means winter 2023, or I mean 2024, but it could mean early, early 2025, all the way through April 20th, 2025. 27 days. Thank you. Thank you for updating us. 27 days to go. And I just wanted to note that, we've been having conversations, we've been bringing partners together to help do some partnership matchmaking, since partners are so important for this grant opportunity. So if you're confused about who to partner with, or you want some support with that, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. This is a top priority for our office, to support those who are putting together high quality grants. So please reach out. All right, I think I have one more slide, and this is my exciting teaser slide to give you a little bit of a look at this asset inventory tech resource finder. We're still working on the exact name for this online interactive database, but we're really excited about it. We hope that it's a way to be able to connect with programs and resources within your own community. We've heard over and over again that people don't know what's happening within their own counties, and they want to connect with folks, but also to connect with folks who might be beyond, say, your county or your region, and learn from others, and to be able to connect people to specific programs. So we're excited for this to be launched. So I'm hoping that by our next quarterly update, this will be fully launched and we can show you a demo. I'm going to stop right there and see. I unfortunately have to jump early today, which I hate to do, but see if there's any questions in the chat about any that I shared, any comments, feedback. Crystal, is there anything I missed as I was talking?
No, unfortunately, no questions yet. If you have questions afterward that you think of, please don't hesitate to put them in the chat and we'll get back to you later. But if you have any questions, you've got just a few minutes now.
While people might be thinking of their questions, I just wanted to note that, the summer has been sort of a building period, right? We had so much to update on throughout the planning process, and the plan was accepted. And now it's been the applying for funding, either us or others applying for funding, the kind of building of resources. And so there's been a lot of work behind the scenes, but this is more of a celebratory update as we then kind of dig into what implementation looks like, and what funding looks like for each of you who are interested in applying for the competitive grant. All right, I'm seeing no questions, but I know that Crystal and Emily will note any down, and I will be happy to follow up with you, with any of you, if you think of questions after I leave. But thank you, and Emily, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thanks, Maggie.
Thank you, Maggie. I'm Emily Ganji. I'm the Policy Director for the Division of Broadband and Digital Equity. And I'm going to primarily talk about BEAD today, but I did want to share an ARPA announcement and let you know that we've got some new public dashboards since we last convened one of these quarterly update webinars. So if you go to our website, ncbroadband.gov/dashboards, you can now keep track of all the investments we're making with the American Rescue Plan Act funds that we were fortunate to receive thanks to the governor's plan and the approval and allocation of this General Assembly. So you can search by county and see what funds have been awarded in particular counties. You can search by program, whether it's digital equity or infrastructure. You can see if it's infrastructure, the number of households served and businesses served. You can also see where they are in the design, construction, or completion of their project. So we're proud of this resource, and we hope folks will take advantage of it to keep up to date on all the good things happening with those American Rescue Plan Act funds, and reach out to us if you have any questions about that. Next slide, please. So, I always have to throw up this map each time we have one of these webinars to show you what the most recent FCC map looks like. So this is version 4 for North Carolina, and the data is reflective of December 2023. So you can see we've still got more than 200,000 unserved locations in our state and almost 150,000 underserved locations in our state. When whenever I go around the state and talk to different stakeholders and they say, where's the biggest need? And if I always say it's nearly everywhere in our state. So we still have a lot of work to do, and we're excited about the BEAD funding that's coming that's going to help us get to all of these unserved and underserved locations in our state. I also have to give a shout out again to the mapping folks on our team and all of you who helped us to submit challenges to the FCC's fabric regarding locations and availability. As some of you who've been involved in this process for a long time know, when the bipartisan infrastructure law was first enacted and they did the preliminary estimates of what each state would receive from the BEAD program, North Carolina was estimated to get about 800 million. And because of all the work of our mapping team and work that all of you did to help us submit challenges to the FCC's fabric, regarding locations and availability, we received $1.5 billion in BEAD funding. So if you want to go to the next slide, Crystal, we're going to get into how we're going to spend that money. So again, $1.5 billion with a B has been allocated to North Carolina, and for the last year and a half, we've been doing all the work and all the planning to access those funds. So the eligible uses of funding are, of course, for infrastructure for homes and businesses, as well as upgrades to the internet service available for community anchor institutions. And once we've achieved those two primary goals, we can also use the funds for other purposes, such as digital equity programs, workforce training, efforts to increase broadband adoption and affordability, things with devices, public Wi-Fi systems, and that sort of thing. So next slide, please. So the top priority for BEAD funding is unserved areas, and then right behind that is underserved areas. We feel confident based on the $1.5 billion that North Carolina is going to receive from BEAD funding that we'll be able to achieve both of those two primary goals, and also to achieve the third priority, which is to upgrade community anchor institutions to make sure they have a gigabit symmetrical service. We included the definition of what a community anchor institution is on the slide because we know that term gets thrown out a lot and some folks may not be familiar with it, but think of these as community institutions or locations in the community where folks get access to the internet, where they can get access to devices, and where they're accessing important services online that they need, whether it's for education, work, housing, public safety, or any number of things. Of course, healthcare as well. Next slide, please. So the first step in the planning process was what we refer to as more of the strategic plan. So that was submitted to NTIA last summer, and yeah, this summer's almost over, so I guess I have to stop saying last summer. So in summer 2023, and was approved in August, and you can access that plan on our website, and we'll drop links in the chat as we go. Next slide, please. I panicked when Samantha said September 23rd was 23 days away. I thought it was already September and I had missed it. So this is a timeline slide that shows you the process. So we've been doing the planning since 2023. And then this year in 2024, the big focus will be on the BEAD challenge process and the first phase of the subgrantee selection, which will be a pre-qualification phase. And then deployment will start in 2025 and last until 2028. Next slide, please. So NTIA approved volume 1 of our initial proposal since we were last together for one of these webinars. That was approved in April. And because of that, that's what we needed to approval for so that we could begin the challenge process phase for BEAD eligible locations. We've still been incurring for volume 2. Since then, based on the feedback that we're getting from NTIA, we think we're getting close to approval of volume 2, and we're expecting that this fall. So probably September or October is when we expect to get that. And then our workforce development plan is part of volume 2. So once we get volume 2 approval, we'll be able to implement that broadband workforce development plan as well. And all of those are available on our website. Next slide, please. So another timeline written a different way. So this fall, we'll be launching the challenge process to determine locations that are eligible for BEAD funding. It's going to open next week on September 3rd, and I'm going to share more information about that in just a bit. And then we're also going to launch the pre-qualification process for internet service providers who want to be able to bid on BEAD funded projects. And that's going to open in September as well. Then in 2025, we will define the project area units that internet service providers can bid on and create a project area and submit bids to serve those areas. We're going to have a very complicated process to make sure we award bids to serve all of the eligible locations in our state for BEAD funding. And then all of those awards are contingent until we submit our final proposal to the NTIA, which is due 365 days after we get approval of our volume 2. So that will likely be due in the fall of 2025. We can't actually sign the contracts for all those awards until NTIA has approved those contingent award selections. So that's an important note I wanted to make for folks. But of course, we'll be doing all we can to expedite that process. I also wanted to point out that the final proposal for deployment that's due in fall of 2025 also serves as the initial proposal for how the state will use any remaining funds that can then be used for those non-deployment uses that I mentioned earlier, like digital equity initiatives. Next slide, please. So want to focus in on the BEAD challenge process that starts next week. We did host a webinar just especially on that process last week on August 20th, and we'll put the link in the chat if you want to view that webinar. It was a whole hour just on that process and goes into much more detail than I'm going to today. And you can also access the slides there. And we're posting a user guide for the portal and the preliminary list of unserved and underserved locations on that website today too, in preparation for opening the portal next week. So the first phase of the challenge process is the challenge phase, which is when you can submit challenges to the mapping that we have based on all the NTIA restrictions for how this process is supposed to operate. Then we'll have a rebuttal phase that opens October 15th until November 14th, and that's when eligible challengers can submit rebuttals to any challenges that were submitted toward their address or toward the service that they provide if they're internet service providers. And then we'll have a final determination phase from November to December when DIT will decide whether to basically sustain a challenge and uphold it or to reject the challenge. And then we submit the results of the challenge process to NTIA for approval. And again, they have to approve those results before we can put them into use for the subgrantee selection process. Next slide, please. So I think I may have already covered this, but basically the challenge process is to determine which locations are eligible for BEAD funding. And it's really important to us that we have the most accurate data possible, as I've mentioned before. So this is a way for eligible challengers and stakeholders to submit challenges to the mapping data that's available and help us make sure we have the best maps possible. Next slide, please. So there are limitations on who can submit a challenge, who are the eligible challengers according to NTIA. So NTIA has limited eligible challengers to local governments, tribal governments, nonprofit organizations, and broadband service providers. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. I already talked about that one. I'm getting ahead of myself. This is a slide that shows the timeline that I shared with you earlier in a little more graphic way. So you can see the total process will take 120 days. We're at this first box where we're going to publish eligible locations this week before the portal opens next week on the 3rd. Challengers will have 30 days to submit challenges. Then those involved will get a notice that a location that they say they serve or a location that that they have claimed, if it's a community anchor institution, that a challenge has been submitted against that location, and they'll have a chance to provide a rebuttal to that challenge for 30 days. And then we may contact folks to ask for more information as needed. And then for the final determination phase, we'll review all the evidence that's been submitted and make a final determination about whether to uphold the challenge or to reject the challenge. And then we'll submit the results of this whole process to NTIA by early January for their approval. Next slide, please. So one, to give you an idea of what can be challenged in these maps. So it can be the speeds that are provided, the type of technology that's used to provide that service. We've done our best to put together a comprehensive list of community anchor institutions in our state, but we know we didn't get to them all. We've got about 10,000, but we know there are more than that. So we want to hear from folks who think their organization should be on the community anchor institution list. We also know we may have some institutions on there that may be no longer operating, or they may have moved. So we want folks to let us know that as well about community anchor institutions. It's also a chance. We've done our best to include all the enforceable commitments that we're aware of. So this is where other state and federal funding has been awarded to projects to serve particular locations. So those locations come off the BEAD eligible map because they're getting funding from other programs to provide service to those locations. And it could also be the internet service providers tell us that they're planning service to those locations. It's just not active yet. So they have to be able to show us that they've got planned service that's going to be available by December 31st of 2024 in order for those locations to come off the BEAD eligible list. Next slide, please. So you may have noticed that when I talked about who's eligible to submit a challenge, I did not mention individuals. So as I mentioned, NTIA restricts who's eligible to submit a challenge in this process, but we know that there may be individuals in our state who need to submit evidence for a challenge, either for their home or their business, and we want them to have a way to submit that input. So we've set up a consumer input website where individuals can go into the portal and submit. It'll walk them through a process of submitting the evidence for a particular challenge that they believe is necessary for a particular location. And we'll include all the all that will be in the user guide as well, but we'll also put links in the chat. So then the data that those consumers provide on this site that could be used to submit challenges will be shared with eligible challengers who are willing to submit challenges on behalf of those individuals into the portal. And so if your organization is interested in being an eligible challenger who submits challenges on behalf of these individuals, please reach out and let me know that, and I'd love to follow up with you and talk to you more about that. Next slide, please. So individuals can submit evidence related to the availability of service at a location, the speeds that are available, the latency, if there are any data caps, the technology that's available at the site, and if the service that's available there is offered for businesses only instead of residences. Next slide. So this last slide, I wanted to give you a little preview of the sub-grantee selection process. So as I mentioned, the pre-qualification stage is going to open in September and will close in November. And that's an opportunity for internet service providers who want to be pre-qualified to bid on these BEAD projects to share the information that we need to vet their financial, managerial, technical, and operational capabilities and make sure they're able to implement the projects. Then once those folks are pre-qualified, then 2025 is when we'll release the project area units with the BEAD eligible locations, and those providers will be able to put together a project area with the different project area units that have BEAD eligible locations and submit bids to serve those areas with the qualifying broadband service. Of course, there'll be a lot of deconfliction between those different bids, and this will also be the time when we'll set the extremely high cost location threshold. That's a term that NTIA uses, which is where we say above this amount for a location, it's not financially viable for us to provide fiber to that location. So above this amount of cost, we would consider alternative technologies to fiber, because the NTIA and the bipartisan infrastructure law do prioritize fiber internet service over the other technologies available. So we have to honor that priority. So that threshold will be set in 2025 as well, once we receive the bids and see what the money looks like. And then once we've gone through all the bids that have been submitted, and done that complicated puzzle for our state of deconfliction and making preliminary awards, then we'll take a look at what locations that are eligible still remain. Perhaps they didn't receive any applications, and we'll basically go through a negotiation process and talk to internet service providers who may be serving adjacent areas and see if they'd be willing to take on those remaining locations and what the cost would be to do that, which is a unique part of the BEAD program design. Next slide, please, or is that my last one? There we go. So we've made it to questions. So Crystal, I'll let you moderate.
Perfect.
And I'll do my best to answer.
Well, our first question is the BEAD money locked in no matter how the elections go? A little bit of a political one for you first thing.
Yep. So of course, there have been conversations about that between states and with federal officials at NTIA. The NTIA feels confident that the BEAD funding is locked in and will be obligated by December. So a change in administration would not impact the availability of the BEAD funds, because they're intending to approve all of the initial proposals and lock in and obligate the funds before December.
Thank you. Next question is, I registered for the challenge portal and never got a response back. Is that normal?
Yes, I should have mentioned that. Thank you for that question. So once you register for the portal, someone then has to verify your identity and that your organization is eligible. And so there is a delay between when you pre-register on the site and when you get something back saying that you are now enrolled in the portal. And that delay has been heightened because we've had folks on vacation since we opened the pre-registration process last week. But I would expect to hear something by the end of this week if you have any pre-registration.
Perfect. Yeah, we had a few questions about that. And now we have a question from an internet service provider. Does the pre-qualification process we went through last year for GRATE, CAB, stopgap, etc., cover this pre-qualification requirement for BEAD?
No, they are separate pre-qualification processes. And they are similar. So I would say some of the materials that you prepared for that American Rescue Plan Act pre-qualification, you may still be able to use for the BEAD pre-qualification, but the BEAD program has different requirements than the American Rescue Plan Act funds did. And so we have to ask for some different things to pre-qualify internet service providers than we did before. And we also want to give a chance for new entrants into the
that's visible without registering for the challenge process.
You can see the map even if you're not registered to submit a challenge. So once the map goes live next week on September 3rd, you'll be able to see the map on the challenge portal of the BEAD eligible locations.
Okay, and then we've had a few questions about where would you register for the portal. The link that I did put in the chat with the webinar location will actually have that link later on today, but I'll drop that link in the chat in just a moment. Okay. We are trying to register our legal entity in the portal with the correct FRN, but it's giving us an error message and will not allow us to register our company.
I will give you the technical assistance email address so that you can get help with that.
Perfect. That will also be in the user guide that will be available on that page again that I posted earlier on webinar. Okay. Am I understanding that the ISPs, which is internet service providers, would be the ones with NCDIT will be contracting with, or will we have some degree of choice in who will service our areas?
The way the BEAD program is designed with the federal regulations, and because of existing state law in North Carolina about who can provide internet service, DIT will be contracting with internet service providers to provide service to the locations for which they win the bids as part of the BEAD process. And we had to outline the scoring that will be used in our initial proposal. So there's really no way for input beyond that. It's a very objective scoring system for the how NCDIT will determine who wins. There are points awarded for applicants who receive letters of support from local governments. So that's one way that your community can express support for a particular internet service provider, if you would like to.
Thank you. Okay. Any thoughts or examples on how counties with limited resources can gather evidence for the challenge process?
Um, so I would recommend contacting the North Carolina Rural Center, and I got their permission to say that last week. But they've got grant funding to help them with mapping expertise, and they've got folks who are willing to help communities submit challenges on behalf of residents in their community. So Dave Kaiser or Michael Kelly, if you're on and you want to drop your contact info in the chat so folks can reach out to you, that would be great. And if not, I'll go back and do it.
Thank you. Okay. Also, I wanted to bring attention to the chat. Kevin Brown, thank you so much for adding the registration link. It's in there for the challenge process. We had another question. Will bulk challenges be allowed?
Yes, bulk challenges are allowed for most of the types of challenge, and that information will be in the user guide that gets posted today too. And there will also be a template for submitting bulk challenges to make sure that you give us all the information we need.
Great. One more question. Have the CAB award locations or the adjudicated BEAD eligible areas been released? And if not, when will that happen?
So the CAP awards that were made before June 30th are reflected in the NC1 map resource and in the BEAD eligible locations, the preliminary listings that'll be posted on our website today and will appear in the portal next week. So I think that answered the question. Crystal, tell me if I missed an element.
Nope, I think you answered it. We
Okay.
have Dave Kaiser here with the Rural Center. Dave, I'm going to allow you to turn on your mic and your camera, and you can speak to the Rural Center's help. Dave, can you unmute yourself? Okay, doesn't look like it's going to work. Dave, if you could add anything into the chat, that would be fantastic. And then someone asks, what is the email for technical assistance? I'm assuming you mean with the challenge process. I will make sure and drop that in just a minute into the chat. It will also be available on that same webpage I mentioned earlier. We're going to have lots of information available for you by first thing in the morning. Next question, can we request a list of award BSLs for CAB? We see the awards, but not the fabric IDs.
I'll have to get back to you on that one and talk to the mapping folks.
Okay, perfect. That is all the questions we have so far. However, we have a few minutes, so if anyone has a burning question. Okay, hearing none, we will close out. Again, we will be adding the slides and the recording of the webinar to our website. We will be adding a lot of information, including all of the links and downloadable information and a user guide to our website later on today, definitely by first thing in the morning. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to email us at bead@nc.gov or digitalequity@nc.gov. Thank you all so very much. Oh, and there we go. Thank you so much for adding in the Dave Kaiser's email address for the Rural Center. And thank you, Emily, for adding the technical assistance link into the chat. Again, all this information, will, minus Dave's email address, will be available on our website later on today. Thanks you all so much. We appreciate it. Bye-bye.